quite. Good morning. Colin White here from Credit Connect Media. Welcome back to the Collections Technology Think Tank. We're calling this one 4.2. It's our 7th edition of the event. And we'd like to welcome you to our next discussion of the day, our third of the day, which is going to look at customer engagement. We've had some really good conversations earlier around collections strategies and risks, and also last one covered business transformation. So in this session, we're obviously trying to maximize conversation and engagement as ever with all of you guys who are tuning in. So just wanted to flag up the ways you can do that. And in your screen in front of you, you can obviously see us, but you can bring up a menu on the left-hand side if you click on the arrow. That's got information on the event, information on sign up to the next session if you haven't already. It's got a little indicator where you can view information on our speakers. You can download a little bit of information, and also there's some links to as well. But the important thing we want you to pay attention to is the speech bubble. We always like to see questions at these events. Helps measure engagement for us, but also maybe highlight sometimes some of the areas that we're missing. So we'd love your feedback on that, and especially as it's on customer engagement. So that would be great. This session, just to point out, is sponsored by MaxContact, and we've got one of their speakers in this session. So appreciate their support. But enough from me. I'm going to hand you over to the chair for this session, Chris Warburton from McCullough Strategy, who will introduce our panelists, and we'll get the conversation started. So Chris, thank you very much.
Thanks, Colin. Welcome back, everyone. So as Colin says, this is all going to be about customer engagement. And I suppose just as, thinking about customer engagement, a lot of the time really collections comes down to engagement. So if the customer doesn't engage, then it's really hard to provide them with support or provide them with help. And so really the discussion we want to have today is like, how do we best sort of drive that engagement today? And as we've heard from the previous couple of sessions, what's becoming an ever more complex world. We've got multiple channels, we've got different competing attentions for our time. We've got different kind of regulations that we need to apply to, and we've got just changing behaviors of the customer base as well. So that's going to be the topic for this session, customer engagement. And with me, I've got three great speakers. We've got Joe Postle, who's the head of product at Jaja Finance, who are in the credit card and on a mission to sort of redefine credit cards. We've got Sebrina McCullough, who's the head of external relations at the Money Wellness Group. And we've got Andy Brooks, who's the account manager at MaxContact. So all three of you, you're very welcome to. Thanks for joining us today. So to kick off, I was going to start off, and maybe Joe, I was going to come to you first around. So like, if you look at like the dynamics around customer engagement and how customers are interacting with firms, I mean, how have you sort of seen that change over the last say 5 years or so in terms of, and what are you seeing now?
Yeah, completely. So I think customer engagement is a really interesting one. I think obviously companies are continuing to focus, learn, and iterate on how we want customers to engage with us and the benefits of that. We, from our side for Jaja, we have a number of different brands that we offer credit cards under and have different engagement kind of behaviors under each of those. The common thing is the more engaged a customer is, the more they get out of that product and the value for them, but the better they manage their credit. So it is incredibly important, and so for us and for the customer's benefit, the more engaged we can have a customer with the product, as it is, it's better for everyone.
I mean, and Sebrina, I mean, how do you kind of think about it in terms of like building engagement, and I mean, are you seeing it change as well? Or?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a lot of, you'd mentioned at the beginning, Chris, there's a lot of different channels now, and the key thing is about choice and blend of channels, and importantly connecting your people and your technology so that engagement is seamless regardless of the way that they choose to engage, and that customers are not having to keep repeating things, and building those relationships, giving them a reason to want to engage with you rather than a transactional approach to communication, I think is important now.
And Andy, you're obviously in the contact space, right? I mean, so you must be seeing some of this from clients sort of coming through in terms of like maybe different ways of contacting, or subtly in terms of like the way the technology is being used. I mean, what are you picking up from clients and conversations you've been having?
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So from our point of view at MaxContact, we're seeing our clients understand and utilize more and more channels, but doing the channels in the right way and the right timing for their customers to build that engagement, and then making sure that if that channel is incorrect, you can then change to a different channel seamlessly with the same individual talking to the customer. So if web chat's not right for that customer, how do you then engage with that customer via voice? It's not a case of I'll get someone to call you anymore. It's actually I'll speak to you now. How can I help you? And that is the way that the industry is working now, is seamless transition between channels to keep that customer engagement as high as possible.
Yeah, so it's almost like that omni-channel kind of approach is sort of like starting to blend through. And Joe, I'm quite interested in terms of like, particularly in terms of engagement, but also what you mentioned in terms of like, how do you engage across the whole of the life cycle versus just engaging in collections? I mean, from a creditor point of view or from a lender point of view, how do you start thinking about that so it becomes a life cycle discussion rather than a collections challenge to a certain extent? I mean, we talked about consumer duty earlier, but I mean, it feels like it's leaning that kind of way. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so we break down the kind of the customer life cycle into various areas, obviously with huge amounts of focus on acquisition, but then ensuring with, particularly with consumer duty coming along now, we have a whole focus and a whole area team that is focused on customer engagement and ensuring that customers are getting that value out of the product and getting the good customer outcome that, we're targeting for those customers. So it can be a variety of techniques, from the most simple of sending customer communications through the app and engaging with the customer via the app, but the most important thing being we do it at the right time, and that we do it when a customer is either looking, when we see an opportunity for a customer to be able to get more value out of it, or at a time where we see a customer maybe actually needs to talk to us in the collection space. So we have proactive monitoring and kind of monitoring of customer behavior that will be able to help us understand whether, help us flag customers who maybe do want to have a chat with us and maybe do want to talk to us about something that's going on. And, we can proactively engage those customers. And as, Andy was saying, through the channel that they want to. It's not all about app, and particularly when we're obviously in the collections area, it's not all digital. We firmly believe that's got to be the customer has to have the choice of how they want to engage in this when we're talking about collections.
Yeah, and I suppose if you break it down, you've almost like, well, what channel is it? Is it timely? And then what do you say, right? And you're saying is almost like that timeliness piece is actually pretty important in terms of triggers and in terms of like getting the engagement. I mean, Andy, I mean, what's your kind of view on that? I mean, you've obviously owned the channels to a certain extent, but as well. I mean, but how do you sort of generate the timeliness aspect of it?
I suppose it's by knowing your demographic as well and knowing what channel they want to be contacted in. So not everyone wants to be contacting the same channel. So you need to understand that to start with. And once you understand that, then you can start the timings and understand when and where is the best time to contact somebody and on the right channel. So if somebody's in work and you need to contact them, maybe a WhatsApp or a text message at the right time of the day prompts that response at the time that they can contact you via a telecoms call. So it's about that understanding those customers first and demographics you've got.
And so we talked a lot about digital. I mean, do you think digital's right in all circumstances? I mean, you mentioned sort of two digital channels there. I mean, but that versus, what would be traditionally an outbound call or even prompting an inbound call. Is that just, or am I just like talking old school thinking in terms of like it's now just blended and it's all together and it's best for the customer? I mean,
from my point of view, it's what's best for the customer. Not every channel is right for every customer. I've got demographic. My mother would never involve herself in a web chat ever. She wouldn't have a clue what to do, but she'd happily talk to you on the phone for hours on end. But my brother, who's exceptionally busy businessman, would never want to pick the phone up and talk to you. He'd want a web chat and do it correctly. So it depends on your demographics and the mix. It has to be there still. Ultimately, and I'll reiterate it again, the ability to change from a digital channel to a standard traditional communication channel is imperative.
And Sebrina, what's your kind of view on that in terms of like that, the mix of it, and then how do you make sure that you're engaging people using the right channel at the right time? I mean, what's your thinking in terms of like making sure you're sort of carving out that, you know, that alignment with the channel and the communication type?
Yeah, I mean, broadly, I agree with Andy, but I think there's two key points there as well. Is it's not even necessarily just the customer's preference of communication, but also what the communication is. There are some things that are more appropriate to discuss via a telephony channel, some things that are fine going via, you know, a message or a web chat and things. But so I think that's the second thing, is think not just about is the channel appropriate given the demographic and what the customer has explained that their choice preferences are, but also for the style of what you're communicating. And I think the second point around, is digital always best, and can it always be digital? I think more and more now what we're seeing is it isn't, would you like this or that? You know, would you like a phone call or an email? And it's more about a blend. So it's this and that. So some of the technologies, like, for example, two-way video calls with customers, embrace both the human element of communication, but utilize technology to help support that through. So I think what we are likely, and what I hope that we see, is a nice blend in future of using your people and your technology to communicate effectively with customers in a blended way.
Yeah, I mean, do you think you always need to have that human interaction, or do you think a lot of it can be done purely self-serve? I mean,
no, I agree with Andy's point around it completely depends on what the communication is and what the person prefers. You know, I'm a busy parent, for example. Often it's 10 o'clock at night before I get to thinking about things like, oh, I must renew my car insurance. I wouldn't at that point want to be phoning somebody and having a long protracted conversation. I'd like to go online, send all my information off, get some information, and know that if I have a complex question or something that I'd like to discuss further, that there is an option to speak to a human. So I don't think it always
I mean, are you finding that the demographics are kind of changing? Maybe Joe, just in terms of like the wider sort of like lender base. I mean, demographics changing. I mean, often the digital products get a lot of focus, but it's, you know, society's obviously wider than that. But do you think over time that demographics have changed in terms of like adoption of like how people want to engage or when they want to engage? I mean, are our expectations changing?
They definitely are. And I think, you know, if that question asked 20 years ago was a different question being asked today, right, as people have, you know, grown and have you know, as people are aging. So I think we see, you know, we have a number of different brands. Each of those brands have very different demographics and different engagement trends. From our most digital brands, which, you know, we provide the Asda credit card, they are very, very digitally active, and, you know, we can offer a human, and we will call people, and, you know, they are firmly, as a general rule, firmly are, actually, no, I don't want to, please, I'll talk to you over live chat, and they do. Other demographics, other brands, I should say, you know, they are more traditional, and so whilst we, for the self-service for day-to-day management of your account, we are pushing them to, you know, we are promoting self-service as much as possible. You know, as mentioned in the kind of collection space, we are a UK we are a digital lender, sorry. But in the collection space, we know that we want humans to be talking to the customers at that point, and that is the best thing for customers. So, you know, regardless of demographic, we know that there is always a situation for every customer where the right situation is to call us, or for us to call you.
Yeah, and I suppose, you know, so changing demographics, also changing channels. I mean, Andy, I suppose from a channel lineup point of view, I mean, that's sort of been exploding the last, you know, the last few years as well. I mean, with, you know, different, you know, SMS, web chats coming up now. There's, you know, there's been WhatsApp discussions. I mean, there's threads. I think that's come out today. I think it is, in terms of like new types of social media. I mean, like, it's just sort of broadening almost like exponentially. I mean, have we got the right channels? I mean, what are the channels that we should look at, or should we just, you know, the traditional ones are a good place to start because that's 80-90% of it?
I think you're never going to lose voice regardless, because people need voice channel. But then the ones you talked about, like web chat, SMS, two-way SMS now, having those instant conversations, and especially WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger for the younger generations are becoming more and more popular. So with most of our customers, we're still seeing 75 to 80% of the communication within the debt collection clients we have is still voice. But it is starting to get bigger with the right sectors and the right channels available to them. It has lagged behind other sectors in our experience at MaxContact, but it's getting there. And we're starting to see more people come back and say, what else can you offer us, Andy? Can you do WhatsApp? Yes, we can. Can you do Facebook? Yes, we absolutely can. We can give your customers the chance to interact in that response as well.
I mean, do you think we're going to get to video calls? I mean, Sebrina, you mentioned video calls as an example. I mean, we're used to using it now for business all the time. I mean, do you think that's going to we're going to see much more of that in the contact centres?
Yeah, potentially. I think, there are always concerns around privacy and things as well, and where people are with video calls. So I think at the moment there is probably an exploration happening as to where the use cases for video calls can be. And actually for in-debt advice, if you've got a customer who potentially is vulnerable or is working with an advocate, they can be quite helpful sometimes as a video call, as a means of communication. But I think, honestly, the growth of different, you'd mentioned there's a new social media platform, for example, being launched today. The growth of different tools will take us in a different place. I don't think that we can see yet where that will end up. We know my 15-year-old, for example, tells me that Facebook is for old people now. So there's no, I think there is a sense that as these younger consumers are accessing credit and, eventually potentially need advice and support, the channels that they will opt for in 5-6 years' time will be completely different from where we are now. So one of the key things I think that all organizations need to think about is how quickly can you adapt and react to those channels as they multiply, and make sure that you keeping away from a transactional relationship and still keeping that personal relationship with customers.
And how do we stay on top of that? Because you're absolutely right in terms of, when I was looking at TikTok the other day, I was writing about that. It's just like, and if you look at that, there's a whole sort of universe of stuff on there around collections and sort of lending and borrowing, etc. like that. But it's not necessarily the conversations that we might have on this call, as an example, right? So how, as organizations, do we stay on top of that, and on top of it from a marketing point of view, but then also on top of it from a collections point of view and a communications point of view, because it is moving very, very fast, and there might not be things we relate to, and often we've got to reach out to what we're necessarily our comfort zone is as well. So I mean, Joe, maybe ask from a product point of view, and then Sebrina, I'm quite interested in terms of what you're doing from a debt advice point of view. But Joe, I mean, how do you think about that from a product development point of view, or product design point of view, and process design point of view, in terms of making sure that we're staying on top of some of the latest ones?
Yeah, I think it's always that age-old question of trying to find, the needle in the haystack, or just getting through the noise of, of it. So, obviously, yes, there's lots of different channels we can engage customers through, but finding the one, and also from a business priority perspective, we don't have the time, or we don't have the resources to be able to invest in all of the channels. So making sure we are doing what is right for the customers. Obviously that brings us nicely onto like ChatGPT and things like that. So we are able to, which is something that, if we're talking just about content creation, which is similar to TikTok, that is something that ChatGPT will be very good at doing. But again, cut through the noise of that, how can we as the lender and, ensure that that technology is working in the correct way, and it is and we are confident that the content it's generating is right for the customer. And that's, the hard part with new technologies like that is, at the moment, that is, the monitoring and the testing and the evidencing, obviously with Consumer Duty. How are we confident that it is doing the right thing for the customer? And we would need to get comfortable with that. I think, in terms of just other channels, the app for us is the key place, and we want to drive customers to the app. We know that a customer who is engaged with the app is better managing their credit. And so, we know that, and we can look at different communications outside of it, but actually in the context of going there and being able to see your position, your financial position with your debt there, and then talk to us through that app. We know that is, and we can evidence that that's the best way for the customer to engage with us.
I mean, Sebrina, I'm kind of interested into like keeping up on things, but I mean, Joe's he's mentioned it now. You've mentioned ChatGPT, so we chatted a bit about that in terms of like, do you think we'll be able to use that to create more bespoke communications with people? I mean, are there dangers with that? And do you think is there ways of sort of getting another uplift in terms of engagement with customers by sort of being almost like more bespoke, or almost like hyper personalized? I mean, what are your thoughts?
I think there's probably 2 points there, isn't there, about communication channels. So the first one is about engaging customers and creating awareness of services like Debt Advice, which it's important that people have got awareness of the services that can support them, but in a way that they're provided with factual information and ways and routes to access. And then there's the secondary element of whether it's debt advice or collections or customer service, engaging with your customers essentially. And I think there's a danger that, especially with collections, for example, if that's pushing into social media messaging and things like that, that you can create a sense of overwhelm for people, that they feel like every channel that they are using is an opportunity for businesses to engage with them. So I think we need to be cautious from a mental health perspective as well of how our communication channels and the tone and content of messages can be received sometimes. Do I think that ChatGPT will ever provide debt advice? No, I don't think that we'll ever get there. I think that people don't have neat lives that fit into nice, neat scenarios. People have messy, complicated lives, and often it is a very different route for different people. So I don't think ChatGPT will be providing debt advice.
What about the use of it? And maybe Andy, comment around the use of it to sort of almost to provide hyper personalized type communication. And it doesn't have to be ChatGPT, it could be some of these other AI programs are out there. I mean, is that a way of almost like getting across that initial barrier of the initial engagement? Because once you've got someone engaged, to your point, you can talk to them in many different ways, and then you can provide them support. But unless you get them actually too engaged initially, then you can't do that. So, I mean, so is that an area of opportunity you think people are going to look in terms of how do I look at more information to provide a much more sort of targeted message to get people to respond?
I imagine Joe can probably answer that question much better than I can, or maybe Andy. But
I was going to go to Andy.
I think you're right, Chris. And I think that's exactly where ChatGPT will fall initially from a strategy point of view for looking at delinquent collections is actually, if I pick the phone up and phone somebody, they're not going to answer. But if I do a hyper-personalized message beforehand using ChatGPT, saying this is what we're trying to do, we're reaching out to you to support you within your finances, and then actually make the call afterwards to that personalized bit. So you've got that really, really personalized message first, and then you've got an advisor who knows what's going on afterwards. Or vice versa. You're on the call with somebody and you need to then send a text message to them afterwards, highlighting what's happened on the call. By putting keywords into a script and then using ChatGPT to write the message for you, it takes that pressure off the agent to get the message correct and back out to a customer.
And what about, I suppose, linkage to things like hyper automation? And there was just a question that just came through here around live chat communication. Is it fully effective? Is it as valuable as, I suppose, as the actual human to human conversation there? I mean, what do you think around this idea around hyper automation, particularly as you get into things like ChatGPT and be able to have that back and forth almost like completely automatically? Do you think we'll ever get there, or do you think? I think Sebrina, your view was probably no earlier, but
I think that it depends on the journey, honestly, Chris. So there is a lot of work that we all do, I think, that is fairly ask a question, receive an answer, that leads to another question, you receive an answer. So the information capture part, I think, for some consumers could be helpful to allow them to move through things quickly. But I think certainly in debt advice and possibly in other areas as well, there will always come a point where there has to be human interaction for something. So even if it is just verifying initially perhaps what has been put in, and that's why for me I think the important part is connecting your people and your technology, so that using the omni-channel approach that Andy said before, that you can rely perhaps on one or on the other, on digital or on people, but there is always the option there for the customer to step out. So for example, in an online advice journey, having the option of a web chat button that they can select at any time to engage with a human to ask a bespoke or specific question, and then engage back onto the digital journey afterwards. So I think that blended approach is important.
And there's just a follow-on question around sort of says, is it better to use web chat in early or late stage? I mean, and what's your kind of view on that? So where is it best to put sort of digital? Is it early stage collections, or maybe sort of like, or does it work in the back in the later stage as well? I mean, maybe Joe, just comment around sort of where you're seeing the best use of it, because it sounds like you're trying to be digital, but it sounds like that's more sort of like front end really.
Yeah, we see it across the whole spectrum, and being used efficiently. It does come back to that same thing, customer preference. If the customer doesn't want to talk to us in live chat, they won't. And so I think it's making sure that we have the channel available to them. But no, we see customers wanting to engage. For some customers, if it's a hard conversation to have, live chat's a much less personable way to talk to a human, and to save face. So we see customers being more proactive in that sense and using it.
And I suppose we've got consumer duty. I think it's the third time I mentioned it in 3 sessions. So I think it's kind of the hint is it's kind of important for us at the end of the month. I mean, do you think that's going to change behaviors of customers as much as we've got to change? It's going to change behavior of customers in terms of like the way they'll engage with us, and particularly expectations of the way they'll engage with us. I mean, I suppose this whole piece around looking at outcomes, and do we have to think about that differently? I mean, what do you think the impact's going to be in the engagement world? Maybe Andy, just capture your thoughts first.
Yeah, I think from the consumer duty point of view and looking at the channels and communication methods, I think what's important is making sure that every communication is recorded somewhere, whether it's a voice recording you get or an interaction. It's got to be recorded somewhere so we can go back and make sure all agents and consumers have done the right thing at all points of the process. Unless you can actually record the information, don't do it. Don't use that channel. Would be my advice.
So that's the whole piece around the evidencing piece. I mean, yeah. I know that when consumers at the moment already expect every call to be recorded. I mean, do you think that's going to ramp up in terms of the expectations around almost like the duty of care companies have over us as well? I mean, Sebrina, what's your kind of view on it? Do you think it's going to change the behavior fundamentally, or do you think we're already there already anyway? So we're just catch up.
No, I absolutely think it will change. And actually what I'm hoping and expecting that will happen is that firms will start to think about not just what it is that they're communicating, but whether or not it's going to be understood in the way that it's meant. So things like letters that provide particularly complex calculations or interest APRs and things, starting to think about, if we provide this over the phone, would we explain it to a customer? Would we see questions? And if we do, how do we make sure that same explanation makes it through to the letters or the digital communications that we use, so that there's a clearer understanding? And that goes back to the original point about making sure that people understand what it is you're engaging with them for and what you're trying to put across, that the message is received and not just sent. So we've sent you information. Do you understand it? Is it clear? And I'm hoping that the key thing from the consumer duty is that the communications will be of much higher quality, because the idea is that you're not thinking, have I said what I need to say, but has the customer understood what they need to understand?
And how do we start thinking about almost like measuring that engagement? Because typically we'd look at engagements as like, well, did you get contact, or did you get a payment arrangement? Did you actually get to the end of a plan? Those kind of things. Do we need to think about how we measure engagement maybe in a different kind of way? Because there might be sort of subtler kind of measures even earlier in the life cycle around, well, did they engage us with a different way? Did they actually look on the website? Did they engage with different types of products? Did they actually provide us information? Those kind of things. Do we need to change our mindset in terms of engagement as a result of that? I mean, Joe, what's your kind of view on that, really?
No, I completely agree. And I think with consumer duty, we're looking at it and from a monitoring trends from a much broader perspective now, and putting that onus on much wider parts of the business. And it's not just certain areas that are focusing on it, but actually there is now everyone has a responsibility to ensure that they are monitoring things that they are responsible for and also able to see everything else. So we're looking at a wide array of metrics that we always have. We're a completely data driven organization, but putting in those guardrails so that we are able to very rapidly witness or react to changes in trends at a segmentation perspective, but also at a personal perspective. So we do use AI to monitor customers' behavior, as mentioned before, and so that will require, and so we can proactively communicate with them should we see a change in that. With consumer duty, we need to change that and evidence it, and it will, as Sabrina was saying, the customer expectation of us will only come as an industry and as improving our approach to communications and checking that understanding.
Yeah, I mean, what kind of happens to the collections process? And typically I'd sort of defining the collections process as everything pre-debt advice, but before let's say it's 1 pence past due. Let's say define that. It feels like that's sort of almost like getting squeezed between having debt advice so you can do it across multiple creditors versus almost like absorbing into support and almost like an extension of almost like customer care to a certain extent. I mean, what's the outlook under consumer duty for what will be collections? I mean, is that going to happen where it's going to be almost like one or the other? I mean, Sabrina, you obviously sit in the debt advice sector. I mean, what are your kind of views on that? Because it feels like it's changing, like the collections process is changing. It's been on a journey for a while, but it feels like it's changing.
Yeah, and I think as well, the onus is on the original organisation that the customer is engaged with, taking a service from, and to make sure that the journey is right. So sometimes things like outsourcing collections, for example, it creates more of an onus to look at what does that look like and to think about, is collections the right route for this customer, or is debt advice actually the right route? There is there's a wealth of data that lenders and organisations have available to them that shows customer trends and things over time, and whether there is an argument to say actually collections and debt advice should be closer together. It should be that actually customers don't go down the collections route and then end up at debt advice at a later point, that maybe the consideration of should debt advice come earlier? Is there a point about affordability happening earlier?
And Andy, Andy, just given your some of your background, I mean, I'm kind of interested in what your kind of view is in terms of, it feels like we're having a much more sort of holistic sort of customer care collections kind of conversation, and then it goes to debt advice rather than it sort of being almost like separated. I mean, what's your kind of view on that, really, I suppose?
I think it's already happened, Chris. So I was head of collections for a large bank, but it wasn't head of collections, it was head of customer support. We rebranded it 15 years ago to make sure that you were supporting the customers. And then in that role, we probably had about 30 or 40 different streams whereby customers could fill into one of 30 or 40 pots. It wasn't one pot or one size fits all. It is this person a recidivist? Have they been in debt before? If so, what should we be doing? Should we be signposting help to these people? Is this the first time they've ever been in financial difficulties? Where did it go from there? All of these things were taken into account and need to be done now, and continue to happen. Yes, it's difficult because I've been in the industry 26 years, and you still have the can'ts and the won'ts that you talked about 20 years ago, and it's working out who they are in that real-time environment with your agents, and then pushing them down the right channel to support the ones that need support, but pushing the ones that can be paying and should be paying. And it's really difficult, but there's lots of tools out there to help you.
Do you think on the customer care side, or like the pre arrears piece, do you think we've made enough progress on that in terms of proactive contact? Because one of the things the collections process has been very good at is proactive contact. Do you think we've done enough sort of pre collections to engage customers and thinking about how to get them to engage? I mean, is that still an area that can be expanded? I know we talked about on the previous session, but
I think we've done. The industry's done a lot, and a lot of our customers are using the platform in the right way now. And it's not just about, like we said, one voice and calling them and using apps and WhatsApp, but it's about engaging by proving to them that you are there to support as well as bash them, because bashing's not worked. It hasn't worked for the last 30, 40, 50 years. We need to support these customers through the difficulties they're finding. So I know one of our customers is using the platform now that is sending out videos to customers. So they're on the call with the customer about the support they need, and they're sending out videos to these customers saying, look, this is what we can do, and these are the areas we can help you with. So if the call isn't getting through there and then because they're in that real financial difficulty and an awful state, they've got something that they can refer to later of a video that shows them how and where the support is there for them. And I think that's going to be helpful in the future to making sure you reiterate to the customers when you're on the call what else is available. Because I've been there in my previous roles where you're talking to customers that are in such a distressed state that I know that 95% of what I've said to them hasn't got through. So sending that follow-up of this is the debt advice you need, these are the videos of the people you can help in a quick WhatsApp or an SMS there and then, so they can look at it when they've got support around them or other people at home with them, is going to help them in the long term.
And how do we think about content in that kind of context? So one of the things that definitely is a trend is people got short attention spans, right? So it's almost like you get into that marketing conversations around how do you create it so it's sort of like punchy kind of content to really try and get people to start the engagement, which you can then provide the support. I mean, what can we learn from that, particularly from other areas in the collection space, to say, well, look, this is how you grab attention, this is how you get hold of people, which, I mean, one of the ways was you just talked about, I suppose, but it's, what else can we do? What else can we learn? I mean, maybe Joe, what have you thought about some of those kind of things as well?
Yeah, and I think that would come for us down to the data and our analysis of customers to be able to understand the segmentation and the drivers behind that, and that's obviously an iterative process that we refine our models on, etc. But and then it's that personalized content, as narrow a content as possible to help that customer with the situation that they're focused in. Sending them something that's very broad around managing debt and paying off your debt is obviously always helpful, but we want to be more personalized than that, and that's where you've got to have your collections teams working with a cross-functional team, analytics, data science, and marketing and comms.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of think of it as almost like our competition for attention, going back to TikTok, is TikTok, right? And if you've used it, you know how addictive it can be, looking at inane videos. But I mean, they have pretty compelling, very short videos to get engagement, and that's what they're designed on. Do you think we've still got a long way to go in collections? I mean, what's your, I mean, can we do more of that? I mean, Sebrina, you're smiling. What do you think? Are you a TikTok fan? Clearly.
No, not at all. No social media for me, I'm afraid. I agree. I think the attention span piece is important. I just think we all need to be cognizant of some of the messages that we're delivering are really important. And going back to that point about people understanding them, it may be something quick and attention grabbing, but you need to make sure that people stick around for the detail, because it's the detail that's important. So yeah, I don't advocate Andy and Joe going and creating some TikTok videos, some
TikTok profiles. Well, I'll be looking for you both later. So we look at the next sort of like 5 years in terms of engagement and some of the trends that we've kind of have. I mean, where do you see us sort of going from here? I mean, maybe Joe, what's your, if you look at the time horizon of say the next couple of years, I mean, what's on the radar, do you think? We've got to think about with engagement in mind, particularly.
Yeah, I think continuing more of what we've been speaking about. I do think the personalization thing is really interesting. You will very quickly will start seeing you will have one app for your relationship with a bank or But when you log into that app, it will be very, very different depending on the situation the customer is in. So you ultimately many apps within one. That's just, you know, one example of where we're looking at for how do you personalize that in-app experience for customers based on their situation, and we can use technology to drive that. And you know, it is then more of the same. I certainly in 5 years don't think we would be here saying, oh no, we don't have any humans now managing our collections process. I don't think that will be the case. I don't think it is right. But more of the same of how are we kind of in providing the customer with what it is that they want to do, and you know, acknowledging that what is there today is probably not what we will be using in the future.
And Sebrina, how do you see the next sort of 5 years playing out from a consumer engagement point of view?
Yeah, I think as the demographic changes, as those that are younger now start to borrow and you know, potentially, although hopefully not, end up in some form of financial difficulty and using services like lending, collections, advice, I think that they will expect a very different type of communication. We probably will see more that want digital engagement because that's how they're used to communicating with the world. That's how they took their mortgage out or how they engage with their landlord and the lending that they've done. So they'll want that more online. But I think, to Joe's point, I absolutely agree. There are always going to be steps where you need a human there to answer perhaps quite complex questions. And the important thing for us is to make sure that our technology and our people are aligned so that journey is seamless for customers regardless.
So it's almost like giving the humans the tools to have better conversations, to that kind of idea, really. So, and lastly, I suppose, Andy, I mean, what do you see on the roadmap, sort of going forward? I mean, you talked a lot about sort of, I suppose, omni-channel being the big thing, the topic of the moment. But where do we go from here, do you think?
I agree with Joe and Sabrina in the first instance that personalised communication is absolutely the thing to do. From our point of view, we're looking at things like supporting the agent during the call as well. So actual real-time AI that goes in and grabs the relevant data from the customer's record and puts it in front of the agent. We talk a lot about the customer today. We need to support these agents that have to deal with these customers in financial difficulty as well. So making sure that the product and the channel we're using then has a real robot behind it that supports the agent during these difficult conversations, grabs the relevant data, pushes it through. We talk about financial difficulty, so it goes away and grabs the personalised. This is where you can go to. This is what you can do to help, and how we deliver that personalised touch throughout the conversation. That's where I think we'll be going as a platform. I think everyone will be going eventually.
So as much as we talk about, I suppose, AI or artificial intelligence, it's actually going to become AA, I suppose, which is augmented agent to a certain extent. It's like, well, how do you have the technology to then really sort of help the agent have better engagement? Is that kind of what you're thinking?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. Exactly that. It's making sure that agent is available and has the tools, as Joe said, as Sabrina say, to have the relevant conversation and keep it personalised with that customer at all times. Make sure you're personalising what happens, when it happens, and how it happens through. And that's not just with speech, that is with web chat as well. Making sure if you're on a web chat and that web chat's dropped out from a chat bot and come to an agent, that agent still has the tools that they can answer the questions in a timely manner. We've gone away from the days of us Brits being happy to queue and wait for everything. Everything has to be instantaneous. And if you've got a bot that will give you that information instantly to an agent and then can refer that to a customer, that has to be a good thing.
And I suppose one of the challenges that most of us have is I suppose legacy systems, and then how do you integrate that, and then how do you sort of overlay that on top of the existing stack or the existing processes. I mean, I suppose that can take some time. I'd imagine. I mean, unless you sort of you can plug it in with things like APIs or you've got a new kind of tech stack build. I mean, Joe, you must be sort of considering that as being relatively new in terms of like the benefits is. One of the benefits is you can design some of these things in, right?
Yeah, no, we're very lucky, and I've worked in big banks in the past, and know the challenges you have there. The key thing for us, just considering, the art of not knowing what's coming, right, is all just around your data governance and making sure that you are building things today to be used and and collecting data today to be used in a very different way in the future. And that takes a big culture shift as we kind of educate more people around the organization to think about that as well.
Yeah. And would you say that's, I mean, for me, that feels like it's going to as much around data and how we're gathering data. And we heard it earlier, like how do you gather the data and then you can use the data, as it is much around the process, which is the way we used to see it. So we certainly heard on the previous call around the importance of agents and that human interaction, which seems to be like, that seems to be like something that will carry on, but it's almost like the design around that to a certain extent. So I mean, I think we're almost at time, and so I wanted to thank each of you just really around the insights that you've given us around engagement. I mean, it does feel like we've moved a long way, haven't we, in terms of like where we've come from. It feels like it's going at an increasing kind of pace, and I suppose we'll just have to see how the next sort of like 5 years sort of like plays out really. But it does feel like it's really around like how do you support the agents to then have good conversations with people to give good outcomes. I mean, that's the theme that's definitely kind of coming through. So thank you. So Andy, Joe, and Sebrina, thank you very much. And Colin, I'll hand back to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. That was really good. And like we knew the different kinds of AI and machine learning would come on in that conversation, but really interested in how that's applied. But some great conversations there. So for those of you just might have tuned in late on this one, we just we're recording these sessions, so on demand within the next 24 hours. But yes, we've got one more session of the day planned after this one, where we're going to be looking at customer vulnerability. That's going to start at 1 o'clock. If you haven't registered already, you can register now, and you've still got a chance to join that one. But let's round off this particular session, and say a big thank you, obviously, firstly to MaxContact for their support, and obviously Joe, Sebrina, and Andy for their insights. More importantly, as I mentioned, we'll be back in around about 20 minutes. So we hope to see you at that session, or a future session, or a future event. So thanks a lot for your time, everybody. Cheers. Bye bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.